You're listening to The Secrets of Doctor Who, where we discuss everything about the hit BBC series Doctor Who, and today we're discussing the 7th Doctor story, The Curse of Fenric. I'm Dom Bettinelli, and joining me today on the panel are Father Cory Sticha. Hey, Father Cory.
How's it going, Dom?
Very well, thanks. And Jimmy Akin. Hey, Jimmy.
Howdy, Dom.
Folks, be sure to get your very own Secrets of Doctor Who t-shirt or phone case or a bunch of other things like mugs or whatever with our shining happy mugs on them by visiting sqpn.com/merch. You'll also want to check out another show here on the StarQuest Network that you're sure to enjoy called Jimmy Akin's Mysterious World. You can find that wherever fine podcasts are found or at sqpn.com/mysterious. And finally, I want to tell you to stay tuned to this podcast to the very end because we have some great feedback on our previous episodes. So, but this one we're talking about The Curse of Fenric. This is a 7th Doctor story. And Jimmy, can you give us a recap of what happens?
Oh boy, this one is packed, despite the fact it's only 4 parts. So here we go. It's World War II, and the 7th Doctor and Ace land in the north of England for a bit of British folk horror. They've come to visit Dr. Judson, a wheelchair-bound codebreaker who has invented a code-breaking device called the Ultra Machine. Unbeknownst to the Doctor and Ace, British intelligence is using the Ultra Machine as bait for the Russian government, figuring that the Russians won't be allies after the war is over. They want the Russians to steal the machine. Inside of it will be a container of a horrific poison that British intelligence will be able to trigger using a code word planted in one of the messages the machine will decrypt. When the poison is released, it should theoretically kill everyone in the Kremlin. And indeed, a group of Russian soldiers also shows up planning to steal the device. The poison comes from a Norse mythological site under the Anglican parish church, and British intelligence has created a massive stockpile of the poison to drop on German cities and end the war more quickly. Also below the church are Norse inscriptions left by Vikings who visited the area in the 9th century carrying treasures from the Orient. But they were struck by a curse and eventually died, though they had descendants first. Their ship sank in a bay off Maiden's Point, and over the centuries people have been drawn to the bay where they were turned into vampires. This happened because in the future, humanity turns into vampires known as hemivores, which is Greek and Latin for blood eaters, and one of them, known as the Ancient One, has been brought back in time and lives at the bottom of the bay. Eventually, the Viking inscriptions are all decoded, and it causes the vampires to attack. One of the Oriental treasures the Vikings also brought contains an ancient evil from the beginning of the universe that the Doctor has fought before. The Norsemen call it Fenric, and it wants to bring about Ragnarok or the end of the world. Fenric takes control of Dr. Judson, who can now walk, and it summons the Ancient One, who it refers to as the Great Serpent of Norse mythology that will poison the world at Ragnarok. Fenric has the Ancient One telepathically kill all the other vampires, and he orders it to take the poison to the bay and dump enough to kill everyone in the world. This will also create the future in which humanity becomes the hemivores. But Fenric can't resist a challenge to the Doctor, who banished him to the Shadow Dimension 17 centuries ago in a game of chess. The Doctor sets up the pieces of the chessboard the way it was back then and tells Fenric there is a move he can make that will cause him to win the game. Fenric can't figure it out, but after he jumps into a new body, Ace accidentally blurts out the move without realizing that she's telling it to Fenric. Fenric then wins the game and reveals that he's been manipulating things ever since Iceworld, when the Doctor first met Ace. He caused the time storm that brought the two of them together. All of the descendants of the cursed Vikings, including Judson, the Ancient One, and even Ace herself, are wolves of Fenric, and he has influence over them. The Doctor says he knew all this from the start. Fenric orders the Ancient One to kill the Doctor and Ace, but offers to let Ace live if the Doctor will kneel before him. Ace has absolute faith in the Doctor, and this gives her a psychic shield that stops the Ancient One from moving. But when told how to save Ace, the Doctor says, "Kill her." He then says a bunch of deliberately cruel, dismissive things about Ace, that he knew there was evil in her, and that he wouldn't have wasted his time on such an emotionally crippled social misfit if he wasn't going to use her in some way. This breaks Ace's faith in the Doctor, and the Ancient One begins moving. But instead of killing the Doctor and Ace, he pushes Fenric into a biohazard chamber and uses the poison to kill himself and Fenric. Afterwards, the Doctor explains to an inconsolable Ace that he had to break her faith in him to save them and defeat Fenric, but that none of the things he said about her were true. The end. Dom, you're muted.
Sorry, I was just thinking, thanks for coming to this episode of Talking to Doctor Who. Wow, I mean, that is a lot going on in this 4-parter.
Yeah, it's intense.
It's very convoluted.
I mean, this is one I've seen many, many times. Again, when I was watching Doctor Who, the 7th Doctor stories were still coming out, and so I saw this one was fairly new, and I forgot how confusing it can be. I mean, there's things, threads going left, right, up, and down, and it's impressive actually what they packed into less than 2 hours.
Yet, I kind of felt like it was too complex. Like there were too many threads. I felt like at times, like they made the story too big, and it could have been a 2-parter to make it a better story. I think it was just they tried to pack too much in. I don't know. What did you think?
I liked it. I enjoyed it. Oftentimes I find the plots, even though I don't enjoy them as much as I enjoyed this. I thought this was a better than average episode or story. I liked all the stuff they packed into it. Yeah, I think they could have been clearer on a few points, but I would just view this as somewhat demanding television. It's not talking down to us. It's not spoon feeding us information the way a lot do. You have to consciously pay attention to get everything, but I think you can get it on a first watch.
I guess, yeah.
Yeah, I agree. I agree with you, Jimmy. It's a very enjoyable episode. It is, like I said, it's confusing, and part of it is because they're doing the Doctor knows something, but he's not telling, because like he this was all part of his plan. And this is, speaking of plan, this is of course is part of the Cartmel master plan of making the Doctor more mysterious and having background we don't know, and that brought part of it. Is some of the confusion was just because there were things that were revealed at the end that clarified the whole rest of the episode, but we didn't know it at the time.
Yeah, I guess so. I felt like there were a lot of different threads being spooled out, and at times it was at the end it brought them all back together again. But in the course of the 4 stories, the 4 episodes, there was a lot like here, there, and everywhere. I'm like, what is that doing? Like, oh, now we have vampires. That was just Vikings and vampires and Russian soldiers and World War II and it was a lot going on.
And
yeah.
It is a lot, but I found it very compelling. I like the folk horror vibe of this. For people who may not be familiar, British folk horror is typically, it's a genre. It's frequently consists of period pieces, so they may not be set in the present, and this is set in World War II. And it's always in a rural British environment. So it's not in the middle of London. It's in the boonies somewhere, and people encounter supernatural, preternatural things, and that's where the horror comes from. And so and vampires is a common thing in British folk horror. Like if you watch movies like Captain Kronos Vampire Hunter, it will, you get vampires. And so I picked up very quickly on the folk horror vibe here, and I thought it was very thrilling compared to a lot of Doctor Who episodes of this period. When we have 4-part stories, and certainly when we have 6-part stories, I typically don't watch them all in one go. I'll watch a couple of episodes on one day and a couple of episodes on another day, but I don't sit down and watch 4 episodes in a row. But I did this time. This was just so compelling, I just didn't want to stop watching. So I really enjoyed it.
No, I agree.
There was no dead time, that's for sure. There was no, make up time by running through corridors in this one. There was always something going on.
And in fact, there's some points where they cut out them going from one place to another, where 1 minute they're in a building, and the next minute they're on the seashore. There was a lot of time compression with that.
Speaking of folk horror,
that's part of the production history of this. They overshot, and there was discussion for a time of making this a 5-parter, but they didn't go that way, and it turned out they didn't have enough footage for an extra 5th episode. But that's part of why they had to make the cuts they did.
Okay. Yeah, you mentioned folk horror. It reminded me a little bit of the Demons, the third Doctor story.
That's another one.
Yeah, yep. And what was the 4th Doctor story we saw not too long ago, where they were in another English country village that was taken over? It was a body snatchers sort of story. I forget what the name of that one was, but
the robots.
No, it was aliens had taken over the village, and the people in the village were acting strangely. I'd have to go back and look at it. It occurred to me.
Monster.
No, although those are good. Yeah, good ones to qualify. It was the 4th Doctor and Sarah Jane. Anyway, so this is also the penultimate the 7th Doctor story, and kind of the penultimate classic Doctor Who story. This is it. Like after this, there's one more. Survival? I think it is.
Yeah.
One more story, and then it until 2005. Apart from the 8th Doctor story, which I don't know. I don't really call that. Dude. Yeah. Well, I don't call it. It's kind of its own thing though, because it's not really classic Who because it wasn't on the BBC, and it's not really new Who because it's also not on the BBC. But I get it. It's canon. It's just it's in its own realm.
Well, production wise, yes. It also is a blend of classic Who and new Who. It has a lot of elements that were dropped in New Who, but were in classic, and it introduces elements that were prominent in new, but were not in classic. So it is a hybrid piece.
And to be picky, it was on the BBC in Britain. It was on Fox here, but it was it was on the BBC. So, but it was it was a joint production of Fox and the BBC, and that's why it was more Americanized.
Yeah.
Incidentally, since we're talking about connections to other parts of Doctor Who, so we have vampires in this episode, and we've encountered them elsewhere on screen. They're in a 4th Doctor story we haven't done yet called State of Decay, which is one of the many times Adric betrays the Doctor. And also this episode is very much like Orphan 55, where you have this future monster version of humanity in a possible future.
Just a much better version of Orphan 55.
Much better, yes. Also, now this introduces Fenric as an explanation for why the Doctor is together with Ace. He caused the time storm that brought Ace to Iceworld, and he also claims credit for creating the time storm that brought Lady Painfort to the 20th century in Silver Nemesis. And you may remember in Silver Nemesis, there was a chessboard in Lady Painfort's time, and the Doctor made a move on that chessboard. And in this episode, he says, I recognize the significance of that. So he saw Fenric's hand in the events surrounding Lady Painfort. So that's additional evidence, or at least retrospective evidence, that he knew what was going on with Ace and with Fenric the whole time. Incidentally, Fenric is named after the Fenris wolf. That's why we have the wolves of Fenric in this. And the Fenris wolf is another creature from Norse mythology that will kill Odin, and I think Odin, but not Thor. I think it's the Midgard serpent that kills Thor. And so we have the ancient one here is the Midgard serpent from Norse mythology, and Fenric is the Fenris wolf from Norse mythology. Fenris also goes on to appear in Big Finish. He's in a couple of stories that form a sort of two-parter with the 7th Doctor. One of them is called Black and White, and the TARDIS is split into a black TARDIS and a white TARDIS, if I recall correctly. It's been a while since I've listened to it. And then the next story is called Gods and Monsters, and it has again Ace and the 7th Doctor against Fenric on a giant chessboard populated with people from different times and places who are also like wolves of Fenric. And Ace is the companion of the Seventh Doctor and Ace that we heard in Live 34, the guy named Hex.
Mm-hmm.
Hex features prominently in this story, and it has important consequences for Hex. It is not his final appearance, but this story has very important consequences for Hex. So if you want more Fenris, Seventh Doctor, Ace goodness, check out Black and White and Gods and Monsters.
Nice.
So was it the plan all along, do you know, to connect this to Ice Storm, like when they or Ice World, with all of that, you know, they could back construct all that, but was this the plan from the beginning with Ace and the Doctor?
I don't know for sure. I suspect that they are retconning it. What I've read about the development of this story had a lot of moving parts and things that changed. Like originally it wasn't ancient poison that was going to be in the Ultra Machine. It was going to be a nuclear bomb. And they changed it. And so also this story was originally, I think, planned to be the season finale. They didn't know they were going to get canceled, but they were planning this is the season finale, and they moved things around. Also, no, it wasn't going to be the season finale because it was going to come before Ghostlight. Ace mentions that that she knew this spooky old house in Perivale, and that was meant as a line to set up Ghostlight. And Ghostlight was itself originally a story about the Doctor's house on Gallifrey that he grew up in. And so that would suggest that they were retconning in this episode, that it wasn't all pre-planned.
Okay.
Also, the Doctor spends the first, 20 minutes or something of the story wearing a raincoat. And the purpose is to hide his new darker costume that was originally meant to be introduced in this episode. But because they rearranged the episode order, it got unceremoniously introduced in Ghostlight.
Right.
Okay. Yeah, because he wore a much lighter jacket and things like that. So they've changed his costume to make him darker, quote unquote, in both literally and figuratively. I find it interesting, this story that features Soviet soldiers. It premiered in October of 1989, which is a significant period in which the Berlin Wall fell. And
little did they know,
it's kind of interesting to see that because Ace kind of is sweet on the Soviet army captain for some reason. Like it doesn't. They don't really like develop why she suddenly has these feelings for this guy, but they have these feelings, and even this affinity for his Soviet symbols. The hammer and sickle, which in 1989 would have struck differently than in the early 2020s. So I think it would have struck differently back then.
Yeah, it also depends on what subculture you're a member of. But Ace is clearly a 1980s rebellious teen, so her having bought a little hammer and sickle pin at a store and put it on her ginormous jacket would not be out of place.
Yeah, she get that leather bomber jacket with all the stuff on it. So
I don't think it's leather. I think it's I think it's nylon.
It's like a nylon.
Oh,
it's like
yeah.
a nylon. It's an 80s nylon jacket, which she's got a bunch of patches sewn on it.
Right. Yeah. And she's carting it around while she's dressed in the 1940s appropriate clothing.
Which the actress wanted to do because she hadn't got to dress in period clothing before, so she wanted to do that. And wow, 1940s Ace is hot.
Yeah.
she did look very nice in those. Yes. So the location is Northumberland, which is appropriate if you know the history of the Vikings invading England back 1,000+ years ago. As Northumberland was often it's the closest basically to the Danes.
It's also the vulnerable neck of Great Britain if you're a vampire.
Right. The Russian soldiers. The accents, I'm like, why are Italians invading for England. Their accent sounded Italian to me at first, and so it was kind of funny.
I didn't look, but it looked like most of the actors were either Polish or Polish descent, even, so they were at least somewhat related-ish.
Yeah, it could be that the accents were fine. It just I wasn't hearing it right, but it's funny. So we have this base, this naval base that is apparently this important cryptography site where the secret operation is going on. And
you should clarify, it's a naval base, not in the sense that it has ships, but it is run by the Navy.
Right.
Correct.
And yet Ace and the Doctor managed to bluster their way past the sentries, which
that's fun. Yeah.
It's like the guards at this place do not seem to be the swiftest guards, because later on it's like, we need to disable all the radios. So what do? They take an axe to it. You could unplug it from the wall.
Maybe pull some pieces out. Yeah.
Yeah. You don't have to take an axe to the radio.
Well, I like the Doctor goes into the office there with the professor and just start typing out his permission letter and signs Churchill's signature as well as the head of the War Office
while crossing his hands to use.
Yeah, he's doing it both at the same time.
and that seems acceptable, right? Oh my gosh, that was funny. I mean, in the
like
pre-psychic paper era. Yeah.
He is he comes in and Dr. Judson, the guy in the wheelchair, the code breaker, is immediately rude to him. It's like, what are you doing here? And the Doctor manages to befriend him by displaying knowledge of things that Judson is interested in. And then in front of Judson and the secretary, he quickly forges his own pass.
Yeah.
And then when the guards come in demanding to see his pass, he just hands it to them. And neither Judson nor the secretary says anything about he just wrote that right in front of us.
Yeah. And the way that he ingratiates himself with Judson is he recognizes the prisoner's dilemma in a graph on the chalkboard, and then Ace also manages to impress him by recognizing a logic puzzle that she played with as a kid, apparently.
Well, she took a class in computer logic.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
High school.
Yeah.
Which would be amazing to Judson because they didn't have classes in computer logic back then, but he kind of goes with that.
Right.
And just accepts her as, she's an advanced computer expert.
So we have Commander Millington is the base commander. He's in charge. His office is something. It's an exact replica of the code breaking office or the code creating office that the Nazis have in Berlin, right down to a portrait of Hitler on the wall, which the Doctor says this is his way of getting into the mind of his enemy, I guess.
Yeah, I don't know if people actually did that in World War II. I'm kind of doubtful. When they first introduce him, you don't, because you see him sitting in his office and he's clearly in a British uniform, but he's in this Nazi office. And for all we know, we don't know this is on the same base. We don't know he's the base commander. We just know he's a British officer. And you're thinking, oh, wow, this may be somewhere else. It could be in Germany. And this guy is a secret Nazi. But no, he's just trying to get inside of Nazis' heads.
The only difference we find out later is that he's got his class photo where he and Judson were classmates at school.
Right. So Judson and Millington are both descendants of the original Vikings, so they're both wolves of Fenric, as is a female codebreaker that we'll talk about in a second, and Wainwright too, the minister, isn't he? Yes, he is as well.
Vicar. Yep.
So our first glimpse of the vicar is him getting harangued after services by a cranky lady from the village about his sermon. Father, how'd you feel about that?
That PTSD kicked it. No, that's a little extreme, but no, it's like I've had conversations like that by the back door of the church, and I could feel his pain. Let's put it that way.
Yeah, I thought that might be the case. Yeah, she was upset because in his sermon, he said that no one is on the right side in the war. This is World War II, right? So that would offend some.
It would, yeah. Especially if you're British and the Nazis have been doing, all their kind of Battle of Brittany behavior.
Right.
So that I think was I mean, they have a character arc for Reverend Wainwright where he's essentially lost his faith. And so this is kind of an aspect of that, but I don't think you would I would be very surprised to be in the early 1940s in England and hear a priest saying in public from the pulpit that nobody's side is right in this war.
Well, I think
that could kind of get you arrested or something.
Yeah, I think that was kind of an anti-war message they snuck in. By the way, that's not a new Who thing, apparently, sneaking in messages into...
Yeah. They're a little less arrogant and in your face about it in Classic Who, though.
Yeah,
exactly.
Incidentally, Dr. Judson is based on the real-life British mathematician and codebreaker Alan Turing.
Yeah.
Who invented a decrypting machine called the bomb, which was an antidote to the German Enigma machine.
Right. So the church is built over an old Viking cemetery, Viking graves, and Judson.
I guess they don't have Native American cemeteries in Great Britain.
No, they have Viking cemeteries, and Judson apparently is like in his spare time, his hobby is translating the Viking runes on the gravestones in the basement of the church.
And what a jerk Reverend Wainwright is. His grandfather translated them all. He's got a book of them on his shelf, and he's just letting Dr. Judson do all the work all over again.
You know, it's like he figures it's a way that Dr. Judson relaxes by translating. So why do that? You know, why ruin his fun?
Yeah.
Also, these people have no clue what the difference between translation and decryption. Because runes are an alphabet for another language. So once you read the runes, you know what it says in the other language. You then have to translate it from Norse to English. Okay, actually fairly easy because they're cognate languages, so they're going to have a lot of roots in common. But Judson keeps getting orders from Millington, the commander, to run the runes through the decryption machine. And it's like, that's not what decryption machines do. No. They don't translate the language for you. They get it back to the plain text in the original language, and then you have to read it in the original language. So in real life, the Germans were speaking German. They would use the Enigma machine to encrypt the German. Then the British would use the bomb to decrypt the ciphertext back into the original German plain text, and then people who spoke German would have to read it.
Right. Yeah.
See, they're thinking the runes like if you've played the 80s into 90s game Ultima. Speaking of Ultima, which was the name of the machine in this, but that was a role-playing game for Commodore 64 and Apple II and those computers of that era. And they would have runes that were literally letter to letter. So A was this, and B was this, and And so it was more of a decryption or decoding than it was an translation.
Right. So maybe playing off of Ultima, the video game, maybe
it could be. I mean, it was fairly popular among those who would do like role-playing games at the time this came out. So it very well could be.
So there's a Viking curse, because of course, and it talks about the Vikings heading back to the Northway, bearing away the Oriental treasures, and the Doctor notes that the Russian orders, the secret Russian orders, which he's discovered laying about on the beach, talk about going back to Norway, the Northway, bearing the treasure. Not Oriental treasures, but of Dr. Judson. Like they were going to take Dr. Judson. Although it really wasn't Dr. Judson they were after. They were after the machine, which I would think it's not the whole machine, but just like
key component.
Yeah, except then it would leave behind the poison. I mean, you'd think they'd notice the poison inside.
You would think the first thing they would do. I mean, come on, they have guys in Russia. What's the first thing a Russian guy is going to do upon getting this machine? Take it apart.
Yeah. Right.
Well, it was that part with it looked like a motor with the code wheel on it, and that's what they were going to steal. And the poison was behind that.
Yeah, exactly. Like, what's this green goo? Is it important? Nah, just leave it.
The Russians are going to take the minimum, Soviets are going to take the minimum they have to.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah, the whole plan is really kind of problematic from a logic perspective.
Yes, it is. It is. So we meet, I didn't get her name, but Audrey's mom, this young woman, and the doctor
her name is Kathleen.
And the doctor, of course, has an immediate affinity for babies. Of course, Sylvester McCoy would be good at making baby noises to amuse them. And but Ace loves the baby until she finds out the baby's name is Audrey, which is her mother's name, and brings up that she has this. She really hates her mother. Did that get developed earlier? I'm trying to remember. It's been so long.
I think so. I think that's been mentioned before. I know it comes. I'm pretty sure it comes up in Ghostlight, for example. But it's part of Ace's backstory as a troubled teenager.
Mm-hmm. Right. So
she doesn't end up hating this baby. She actually keeps liking the baby, but she has an initially very negative reaction to hearing that the baby's name is Audrey.
Right.
And she doesn't realize it, and it won't be spelled out until the final part of the story. But Kathleen is Ace's grandmother, and Ace doesn't recognize her, and the baby Audrey is her mother.
Yep.
And there are a couple of nice beats in the arc and the character arc for Ace regarding this. We have the initial very negative reaction to learning the baby's name is Audrey, but then throughout the story, she has a great interest in what's going on with Kathleen, because Kathleen is with the other women in the code breaking pool, and Milligan, the commander, has been deliberately cruel to Kathleen and told her, get the baby out of here. It can't be on base. It can't live on base. And so she's going to have to find other arrangements for the baby and herself to live, because they can't live on the base anymore. And then there are situations of danger happening, and Ace keeps taking an interest of wanting to make sure Kathleen and the baby are okay. Also, and this is before she knows who Kathleen and the baby really are, there's a moment where the doctor, Ace, and a Russian commander have all been captured, and they're going to be shot by firing squad. And they're standing up against a wall, and the doctor makes a little speech, and the Russian guy says something, and then Ace says, "Mom, I love you," just to the air. And it's her. I mean, she doesn't die, but this was what she meant to be her dying thought that she expressed, was that she really did love her mom despite everything. And then in the final part of the story, in a rainstorm, the vampires are attacking, and Ace gets Kathleen and the baby into a car and yells at Kathleen to start driving and keep driving until you get to London. Do not stop. Go to the house of my relative that lives in London. Here's her address. Say it out loud after me. And sends them off in this frenzy before Ace herself turns and faces the vampires. And it's a very dramatic moment, and it's a really nice conclusion, because now she knows that this is her grandmother and the baby is her mother, and she's sending them off to London to be safe. And it's a really nice character arc for Ace.
I did make a note as soon as they mentioned like Audrey, her mother's name. I'm like, oh, it's her mother.
Yeah.
it was
time travel show. Of course it is.
Yes, exactly. So the Doctor and Ace get captured by the Russians on the beach. They've been slowly getting massacred by the Great Serpent, basically, the Hemivore, which we haven't seen yet.
And I checked, and by the way, this Great Serpent creature, which looks really weird, is not the Grand Serpent from Doctor Who Flux.
Yes,
because the Great Serpent, the Ancient One, is from 500,000 years in our future. He's from Earth, whereas the Grand Serpent is a leader on Vendor VK's planet.
Right. So the Russians end up letting the Doctor and Ace go because the doctor convinced them that he's going to solve whatever is killing them on the beach. It's just a little implausible, but okay. Then we have this secret lab under the church that's collecting this mysterious poison that seems to be seeping out from the Viking graves that nobody seems to be curious why. There's this poison, this vibrant green poison seeping out. But hey, what luck! We have a natural source of a lethal poison that we want to use as a weapon of mass destruction initially on the Germans. And I thought this was an interesting aspect of this is Millington and his superiors. I think they're pretty convinced that the Germans are going to lose the war. I'm not sure what year was this supposed to be. The end of the war, right? Probably the end of the war. 43. So not the.
They never said. They just kind of said during the war. So
yeah,
they must be early. I would guess. I don't know.
Yeah, the wiki says 1943. But in any case, like they're fairly convinced that we're going to win the war, and it's the Soviets we have to worry about afterward. Which Cold War retrospect, of course. And
there were people who expected that in World War II. I remember reading a piece of an autobiography of Joseph Ratzinger, who, even though his family was anti-Nazi, at a certain point they just started conscripting everybody, and so he ended up digging ditches as a soldier for the Germans in World War II. I believe he never fired a gun, but he did manual work. And at the end of the war, being in a German uniform, he got put in a temporary prison camp. Until the Nazi soldiers could be demobilized and repatriated. And while they're in the prison, in the Allied prison camp, he and the other soldiers are talking like, okay, so what's going to happen now that they've defeated Hitler is they're just going to draft us all into the Allied armies and we're going to go fight the Russians now. And there were people in the United States who wanted to not keep this war going exactly, but to immediately attack the Soviet Union and deal with them
while they were still weak from the war. Yeah. I mean, we had all those divisions over there already, I guess. Yeah. If you were going to do it, and the Russians didn't have the bomb yet.
Right.
I don't agree that would have been a good thing, but I can understand the thinking. So the vicar we mentioned before, Wainwright, he's having this crisis of faith, and I think they don't come right out and say it, but I think it's clear it's because he's letting them use his church to create this weapon of mass destruction from whatever's beneath it, and so that's, I think, at the root of his crisis of faith.
Also, the fact the Allies are bombing children in, they're bombing civilian population centers, including children in Germany and also other places like Japan.
Yeah. Right.
And it destroyed his faith. His faith seems not to so much be, and I guess this is kind of typical of a certain brand of like liberal Christianity, not just in Anglicanism, but in the mid 20th century and in the 20th century in general, you had sort of liberal people who wouldn't be wild about saying, I have faith in Jesus Christ. They would use more non-committal things like, I have faith in goodness, and that's what Reverend Wainwright really believed in was human goodness. He's not so much a Christian as wanting to be a nice guy. And then the bombing of children smashed his faith in human goodness, where even the supposed good guys, the Allies, are bombing children.
Right. There is a scene where Wainwright is in his empty church, standing in his pulpit, and he's quoting from 1 Corinthians chapter 13. Yeah. When I was a child, I spoke as a child, I understood as a child, I thought as a child. When I became a man, I put away childish things. Now abides faith, hope, and love. These three, and the greatest of these is, and he can't say love. And it seems weird at first until we find out later that Millington has co-opted love as the word for the destruction of the Soviets, which is an interesting subtext to this story, which is love has been co-opted, and Wainwright recognizes the significance of using love in that way. I thought that was interesting. That was a good bit of writing there.
Well, and it really does point to talking about the the poison coming out from underneath the church being used as a weapon and being collected. Lots of it. You know, we see later where it's a room full of bombs, full of this poison.
And the back-talking church lady is herself full of poison in a metaphorical sense. She's a stereotypical Christian hater.
Right, she is. And she's got these two young women who, like, there were a lot of people who had been evacuated from London during the war. Chronicles of Narnia, you know, that's, you know, if you've read those, you know that story with those kids. And there's these two young women that she's taken in, but she's really, you know, this sort of battle axe nagging figure to them, telling them what horrible creatures are because they went swimming wearing bathing suits
at Maiden's Point, which is an evil location,
right?
And the two girls are kind of jerks back to her. I mean, they're meant to be sympathetic, but actually they're also jerks.
Yeah.
And so a pox on both their houses, and when the pox comes for the girls, these 1940 London girls turn into vampires with very 1980s hair.
Yes. And very long nails. At one point they go swimming in their clothes, and I'm like, why are they swimming in their clothes? It was very strange. And the lady wasn't wrong, by the way. It was a bad place to go swimming.
It was. You go there, you get turned into vampires.
Exactly.
And actually what the lady warned them about was that you hear, like, you go there and you hear the screams of all the other women who've been drawn to the place, and it's like, that kind of makes sense because they're all at the bottom of the bay living tortured vampire lives.
Yeah. Right.
And I think they kind of talk about why the girls went back the second time and went in, because they were being drawn in by this curse, you know. And so, because then later on, after they've been changed, there's the Russian soldiers like, oh, come in. You want to come in. You're not being coerced. You want to do it willingly. Just come on in. The water's so nice. And of course he's killed.
Yes, like the sirens. By the way, the lady's name is Mrs. Hardacre, which is that's a little bit on the nose of naming. Name. Yeah. So later on, Millington, after he does his supervillain monologuing to the Doctor about dreaming of destroying Dresden and Moscow with his bombs, he orders. I mentioned how he ordered all the radios disabled. He orders all the chess sets on base to be burned. Yep. Why? What? Like, I think I know, like, because Fenric can use it to solve his puzzle, but how does Millington know this?
They don't make that clear. Millington obviously has a lot of knowledge that comes from somewhere. Like, he somehow knew that the vessel containing Fenric would be brought to them. And it turns out it's this little oriental jug, although it's so aged you can't tell what culture it's from. I would want to know just which Orient are we talking about here? I mean, Vikings were known for coming west to attack. So what did they? I mean, they didn't get as far as China. Is this by the Orient? Do you just mean the Russian steppes or what?
I mean, technically, Constantinople is the seat of Asia. It's like maybe. Yeah.
But
I mean, for Russian or for Vikings in Norway, I mean, basically all of Europe is the Orient, if you want to be picky.
Well, yeah.
Yeah, it just seems to me that this is a very Western East that they're talking about. But Millington knows that somehow he has prophetic knowledge that this vessel is going to be brought to them, which Ace ends up doing unwittingly. And so I just took his knowledge of get rid of all the chess sets as similar, because Fenric has this irresistible compulsion to play chess with the Doctor.
Yeah. I think that's kind of how I took it too, was Fenric wanted to make sure that the Doctor couldn't reset his trap.
Right.
Yeah. Also, by the way, notice that the move that they propose that Fenric can use to win makes absolutely no sense in terms of chess, because the move is, instead of fighting against each other, the black and white pawns need to team up. And it's like, okay, if I'm Fenris, if I'm the black player, there is no way I can suddenly seize control of all my opponent's white pawns. That is not a legitimate move in chess.
Exactly. Cheating. So when the girls go after the vampire girls now go after Wainwright, they tell him we were lost on the day we were born. And Wainwright says no one is ever lost, which is a Christian, no one is truly lost if you can repent. But are they saying that they are also wolves of Fenric, that they're descendants of the Vikings who originally were cursed? I kind of got that sense, maybe.
Yeah.
Yeah. The Doctor's also gets challenged about having family, and he says he doesn't know if he has family. I thought that was an interesting line.
Yeah, that's a very interesting line. It kind of foreshadows the Time War.
Mm-hmm. It does. I mean, we know that Susan is family, but is she still alive? Maybe is what he's wondering.
Yeah, but again, time machine. Do you have family? Yes, and she's living in 2150.
Yeah.
Yes.
Just not at this time period.
Right. So maybe that's why you say I don't know. So while the Doctor and Ace and let's see who else is there, is Wainwright are in the church, the vampires attack the church, which they've noted is built like a fortress, like a fort, which it's actually not, but okay. I mean, it's like an English, country village church. Ace goes up to the tower and happens to have a rope ladder in her bag.
And then starts climbing down for no discernible reason. And it's just like, hey, this happened in Dragonfire too, where the Doctor climbed over a rail for no discernible reason.
Right. And she climbs down to where the vampires are and starts to go back up again. And saved by the Soviet soldiers. That was the thing there.
Well, of course, we got the vampires climbing onto the roof of the church for reasons. At least with Ace, she said she wanted to go rock climbing, so you could say, okay, she's going to go use the ladder as part of her rock climbing, I guess.
Yeah. I kind of took it as Ace is always prepared. Who knows what's in that bag? She's got everything.
Yeah. Obviously, Nitro 9, so.
Right. So the Doctor manages. Go ahead.
This might be where you were going. I was going to mention that it's nice for once for the Russian bullets to actually hurt the vampires.
Yes.
Yeah.
So that's good. But then the Doctor does something very strange. He sings something at a very high pitch, and it causes the vampires to scream and retreat. And in hindsight, it is revealed that this was a manifestation of the Doctor's faith, and it's the faith that drives away the vampires. This is a key principle in this story. And it's why the Doctor has to break Ace's faith in him later. But what he's actually doing is singing the names of former companions. And you can apparently hear him say Susan, Barbara, Vicky, and Stephen. So that's what the Doctor has faith in.
Oh, interesting. I did not hear that, but okay. Because, classically in vampire stories, the holy objects will repel vampires, but in this, they've made it so it's not the holy object itself, but the faith of the person wielding it that sends them away. And that's how Sorin, who's the Russian army captain, he manages to repel the vampires by his complete faith in the revolution.
Yeah.
He's a good soldier of the revolution.
He's a commie.
And this is faith in that more of the sense of like a strong trust, like a unbreakable trust than it is. We think of faith is the evidence of things not seen, as St. Paul says. Right.
So they manage to escape through. Sorin walks through the vampires and kind of leads them away. The Doctor and Wainwright and Ace and two of the Russian soldiers escape through tunnels that lead onto the base. And the soldiers, hold off the vampires while the others get out. And then Millington locks them inside the tunnel to die. Millington is
the
really
two remaining Russian soldiers. Yeah.
Yeah. Really cold blooded. Really makes Millington the villain in much of this.
Mm-hmm. He ends up becoming basically a villain, kind of an assistant to Fenric until he's killed.
So we do have Ace does eventually confront the Doctor, stops him. Why are you holding back what you know? Why are you holding back your knowledge of what's going on? And he tells her he can't tell. He says, I can't tell you. But why doesn't he tell her? Why can't he tell her? Sometimes the Doctor, in all of his incarnations, sometimes he just likes being mysterious. He likes to be the one who knows the most in the room. But in this, he's implying that if he tells her, it'll ruin it. Why? I didn't get that.
I don't know. Maybe because she blurts out stuff that like twice in this story that ruins things.
I guess, yeah, that's true. She blurts out the chess solution.
Well, the first one was, I did. Good thing he doesn't know that the runes are actually, computer logic. Oh, why didn't you tell me?
Yeah.
He does now. Thanks, Ace. And then it was the chess set.
I love how, they're walking through. I love how they play that revelation where they're walking through the woods and the doctor is talking to whoever it is and says, we do need to go deal with Judson. But the good thing is he doesn't know that he doesn't know this thing. And Ace just stops and says, Doctor, you should have told me. And the doctor just says, quick, we've got to get there.
Yeah.
Right. Well, but again, that's actually an example of if he'd told her, don't say these things, then she wouldn't have. So if she'd had the knowledge, she would have been better off. But yeah, she does reveal the chess solution. Yeah. Although, again, if he told her, don't tell anyone how to solve any chess moves, that might have been, she might have known not to say anything.
You're asking for a diegetic reason.
I know.
The non-diegetic reason is because they want the doctor to be mysterious.
Yeah.
I get that. I get it. Yeah.
And this is what the Seventh Doctor became known for, was having that bit of mystery to him, that bit of, I know something you don't. Again, not to the level of New Who, where it's like the doctor knows everything instantly, but
yeah. It's interesting how they've been transforming the Seventh Doctor from sort of playful, much like the Second Doctor, to this more mysterious and darker version of himself, which I gather was the intent.
And he is very similar in that way to the Second Doctor, because the Second Doctor would also put on this humble persona and let people misunderestimate him and use that to his advantage. And the Seventh Doctor definitely does that.
Oh yeah.
Right. So, we've talked a lot about how the story ends, the Great Serpent or the Ancient One. We have the chess sets, all the cryptography girls get vampired except for Audrey's mom, and
Kathleen actually there's a very dramatic scene in this with Kathleen. By the way, in the firing squad scene, actually what Ace said was, Mom, I'm sorry.
Yes.
But again, it still communicates the same message.
Yeah.
But there's a scene where Ace goes to see Kathleen and the baby and make sure they're okay. And Kathleen is weeping, and she's just gotten a telegram telling her that her husband, Frank, is missing and presumed dead. Due to being on a merchant marine ship that was struck by a torpedo and sank. And so Ace has to be there to deal with the emotional aftermath of that telegram, and it's a moving scene. Also, there's a nice scene earlier where when she's first kind of alone with Kathleen, she's talking to her about the baby and who the baby's father is, and she finds out that Kathleen has a husband named Frank, and she's like, "Oh, I didn't know you were married." And Kathleen is immediately incensed by. She doesn't say, what kind of girl do you think I am? Yeah. But she very quickly turns it around on Ace, and Ace backs down and realizes, okay, 1940s, do not assume women with babies are unmarried.
Yeah. Yes. The implications of what Ace said greatly offended.
And there's a later scene, which also kind of gets us into similar waters, where the Russian guy has been locked up. The Russian leader has been locked up, and the doctor and Ace need to get him out of the clink. And so Ace says that I'll distract the guard and you can get him out. And the doctor is like, how? And she says, Professor, I'm not a little girl. Yeah. And then she basically, she bats her eyes and intrigues the guard and lures him away for a private conversation, which is probably a symbol of something else. And she then has this strange flirty conversation with
It was very weird.
that does not make any sense. And I'm not sure exactly what the writers were thinking, because this is not like seduction dialogue that would work in any dimension inhabited by humans.
No. Now, according to the wiki, there was a line that was removed that implied that Sabalon Glitz and Ace did something, shall we say?
Well, yeah. In the novelization, apparently, I mean, it indicated, if I recall what I read correctly, that there was a line in here originally that indicated Ace was not a virgin, and in the novelization it said Sabalon Glitz was responsible for that.
Yep, that's what I was implying. Yeah.
So and maybe in the TV story they're trying to imply something else without coming out and saying it for the sake of the censors. You know what I mean? And so they had this weird flirty conversation instead of an outright flirty conversation, because Ace is still supposed to be pretty young, so, and it's still I think considered a kids show. Yeah, so that's the only thing I can think of how weird it was.
I wonder too, though, if, because we talked about this before, that there was the Cartmel master plan, and part of that was that Ace was going to become a time lady, and this was meant to imply that her abilities were starting to kind of come out, because she talked about being able to see things that aren't directly in front of her, see what's under the ocean and everything.
Yeah.
And I wonder if that's kind of where it was eventually going to go, that if they had the 27th season, that they would have built on this.
Yeah, the 27th season would have been, I was recently watching a video about it. We know a good bit about it, and some of the stories that were planned for it have now been adapted by Big Finish as part of their Lost Stories run. But basically it would be like about 4 stories, 14 episodes total, and Ace would have left a little around the 2/3 mark. So she might have been in 3 of the stories, and that would have been it for her.
Yeah, I saw the same video as well, and that's kind of what brought it to mind.
Interesting. It is interesting how for much of this, the final story, you have the Russians and the British soldiers are fighting, even while they're having to deal with the vampires attacking, until finally because of Millington's prodding, but finally the soldier, the Marines, they're really Marines, the Marine in charge says, "Look, let's stop fighting." The Russian and the Marine, and work together to repel this invasion of vampires. And it's like, yes, finally somebody's using their head. So that was kind of wild.
Admittedly, the British soldiers had an excuse previously in that their commander was in league with the vampires.
Yes.
And was giving them conflicting orders.
So it does get revealed that the reason Soren could be taken over by Fenric, Fenric jumps from Judson to Soren, is because Soren, even though he's
Soren's the Russian guy.
His, did he say somebody a relative was British?
Yeah,
and
his grandmother was British
and was a descendant of the Vikings. So he is also a wolf of Fenric, and thus susceptible to the curse. And like you said, Ace is also a wolf of Fenric. So Kathleen is a descendant of the Vikings who stole the treasure. So that's why he has this tragic end here, and and Ace's feelings for him are part of that tragedy. And you mentioned how the Doctor had already started to work on the Ancient One to turn him against Fenric, but Ace doesn't know that, and so her faith in the Doctor holds back the Ancient One's. Whether he's attacking them or Fenric. And so that's why the Doctor has to break her faith in him. But it was a very dark moment in this story when the Doctor started saying these awful, awful things.
Which actually ring true.
Yes.
And even though the Doctor says later none of them are true, there's an element of truth in them, or they wouldn't have broken her faith.
Right. At least there's an element of her own self-doubt, in there that maybe it could be true. So, and that's when we have the
social misfit. I think she'd own that one. Say yes.
Yeah.
It's probably the emotional attack, the emotionally stunted that she didn't like. But yeah, definitely fit social misfit pretty well.
She does say to him, he says, I had to make you lose your belief in me. And she goes, full marks for teenage psychology.
Yeah.
Yeah. Like, ouch, turn that. And then later on, they're standing by the water and he tells her, don't be frightened of the water. Love and hate, frightening feelings, especially when they're trapped, struggling beneath the surface. Don't be frightened of the water. And that's her signal to jump in the water and swim back to the beach from there. Was she frightened of water before?
They established it early when they found the Russian orders on the beach. She talked about how she liked to look at the ocean, but she did not want to go swimming. She didn't like that.
Mm-hmm.
I missed that line. Okay. So and that was, now she's fine.
Her going swimming was the sign that this threat had been neutralized.
Okay. And that's the interesting is as we end, they're walking up on the beach and they see the sign that's there, no swimming, dangerous undercurrents. And Ace says, dangerous undercurrents, doctor? And he says, not anymore. And again, some subtext. The doctor is saying, I'm no longer going to, have this manner in which, this darkness about me that, in our relationship or not.
Or not, yeah, or going to use, not going to use her is, I think, what he was trying to imply the way he did. But
right.
Oh, I just took it as we fixed this village.
Okay. I took it as a bigger, but maybe that's just that we fixed the village. All right, so that's all my notes. So, do you guys have any other notes, Father Cory?
So I got a kick out of the baby Audrey, supposedly, a female. Is actually a male played by Aaron Hanley, the youngest actor ever to be on Doctor Who. Because he actually was born in 1989 when this came out, so it was fairly newborn.
Yep, that was a new baby. Anything else? That's it, Jimmy?
So I like at the beginning of this how it really shows that the Doctor and Ace are friends. You can really feel the fact that they have genuine friendship together. Mm-hmm. And I always like it when that happens, when they're able to portray that on screen between Doctor and companions. When Millington locks the two Russians in the tunnel to die, he tries to justify it by telling this story about how he was once on a ship and a fire broke out on the ship and they had to seal a hatch in order to contain the fire, knowing that there were men on the other side of the hatch. And this was a justified decision. And he then says their screams went on for an hour. And it's like, wow, that is effectively creepy. I also thought it was effectively creepy that the climax of this takes place in a thunderstorm. It's also a daytime thunderstorm, but, I think the fact that it's just raining cats and dogs, as all the action is going down is effective. I like that as a atmospheric device.
All TV storms are thunderstorms.
Yeah.
There are no rainstorms without thunder and lightning on TV. That's just a fact.
This is one that they said was, at least in the dialogue, they implied that this was a sudden storm. It wasn't something, although there was the storm is coming, they had a couple of times where that line was used, but the weather was beautiful. It was sunny. It was, all of a sudden it just downpours.
Yeah.
And they had weather troubles during the shooting of this story. That's one of the reasons the ground is just sopping mud a lot of the time.
Yeah.
Incidentally, I don't know if they say this in England, but down south where I'm from, one of the old time sayings, younger people won't know this because younger people. But if it rains and the sun is out at the same time, that is an unnatural condition. Because normally you expect there to be clouds and that will block out the sun if it's raining. And so if it's actually raining, but it's also the sun is out, the folk saying for that is the devil is beating his wife, indicating that an unnatural thing is happening.
That is not the saying I'd heard before.
But the devil is beating his wife seems to fit this, the end of this story. It's kind of
true.
Folk horror. Yeah.
I was going to say up here, it's a little more wholesome. They say that in 90 days, they're going to get moisture, rain or snow or whatever.
Oh, interesting.
If it rains when the sun's out.
We just call it a sun shower.
Now, see, that makes it sound cute.
Yes, it is. Yeah, it does. All right, that does it for The Curse of Fenric. And I mentioned we have some feedback, and I want to share with you now. This is from our episode 297, Mummy on the Orient Express, the 12th Doctor story. Our friend Bennett on Facebook writes, Perkins, Frank Skinner, who played by Frank Skinner, is a bit of a stunt casting, but he's also Catholic and speaks about it publicly. His most recent book was A Comedian's Prayer Book. A very UK point of interest is that he was part of a team that wrote an England football song back in 1996, which is still sung by the crowds today. I don't know what his comedy stage show is like now, but back in the days that he drank a lot, it was quite adult. But he stopped drinking alcohol when he was 29. So, Frank Skinner. I think we mentioned the stunt casting back when we originally talked about this episode too.
Yeah, we did. And actually, since we recorded that episode, I've been watching British TV series called Taskmaster, which it's a lot of fun. It's not for kids. This is definitely not for kids, but it's a lot of fun. Comedians are given these sometimes ridiculous tasks to do, and the first season Frank Skinner was in there, and he was quite funny. He kind of played the humble buffoon type character. He was kind of fun to watch.
Oh, cool, good, excellent. Thank you, Bennett. I always rely on you for some of the cultural color on some of these things that we as Americans don't get. So I appreciate that. All right, I want to take a moment to thank our patrons who make it possible for us to create Secrets of Doctor Who, including Paul J., Susan D., Dominic S., Callistus M., and Kiana C. Their generous donations at sqpn.com/give make it possible for us to continue the Secrets of Doctor Who and all the shows at StarQuest, and you can join them by visiting sqpn.com/give. This StarQuest show is also brought to you in part by Jacqueline Brown, the best-selling author of The Light series. Check out her new release, Altered, on Amazon or any fine bookstore. Learn more about her and her work at sqpn.com/brown. And we'd also like to thank Victor Lambs, who edited this episode. So we'd love to hear what you think of The Curse of Fenric, this 7th Doctor story. You can let us know by commenting on the show at sqpn.com or the Secrets of Doctor Who Facebook page, or send an email to drwho@sqpn.com, or visit the StarQuest Discord community at sqpn.com/discord. We'll be back next time, and we'll be discussing In the Forest of the Night, the 12th Doctor story, or as I like to call it, In the Forest of the Night at the Museum. Until then, Jimmy Akin, thank you for joining me and sharing the Secrets of Doctor Who.
Yeah, whatever.
Looking forward to that. Father Cory Sticha, thank you as well.
Thank you, Dom.
And once again, I'm Dom Bettinelli. Thank you for listening to the Secrets of Doctor Who on StarQuest, and remember, why didn't he translate the final inscription? It's always the family idiot that takes the cloth.